Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and today I've got a little bit of a miniature rescue.
Oh, seriously? You're just gonna be copying that other YouTuber? Terrible content. Unsubscribe.
Can you not? It's not copying, it's a parody video.
Parody. More like a rip-off. Huh.
Seriously? Anyway, this is an orc model that I painted quite a few years ago.
What do you mean this is one of your old... You didn't even get it off of eBay. How can you do a parody of eBay miniature rescues when it's not even from eBay?
Shut up! Shut up! Leave me alone. Let's just get into the video.
Fine. Do your intro.
So now that that's out of the way, hopefully, we can have a look at the model itself. Now this is a classic orc model that I've had for quite some time, and I have no idea where it actually came from. I'm pretty sure that this is a very early, either first or second edition 40k, or perhaps a Gorka Morka model. I'm not actually certain. Usually models like this will have some information written on the tab for the slaughter base. However, that's been cut off and this guy's been glued flat down onto this base. And for anyone who's watched any of my videos more recently, you can tell that I'm probably better at painting now than I was when I painted this. Not that I'm competition standard or anything now, but I'm certainly better than the splotchy paint job that I'm showing off here. And so I thought this was an excellent candidate for me to repaint. And I was so excited to get started that I went straight into painting the eyes. However, I did stop myself and remember that the first thing I should do is to actually clean the model, or at the very least get rid of a lot of the dust. This model has been sitting with all my other orcs on a shelf for the past decade, so it's collected quite an amount of dust in that time, and that's going to play havoc with the paint application. And one thing that I noted straight away was that the entire model looks very, very dark. Not only because the model's leaning over and most of his chest is in shadow, but also the brown, the metallics, and a fairly dark green skin tone as well, plus quite a lot of the model is just plain black and hasn't been painted at all. So clearly time for me to finish it off. And I want to show the kind of idea that I had of how to repaint this by showing the painting of the coat. And yes, I'm painting a trench coat brown for the third time in very quick succession, but it did manage to work out, I think, so that's not a problem. But what I was trying here was in the recesses where I've got the kind of the old splotchy dark colours, particularly where it's showing some black through from the primer layer. I'm sort of leaving that as it is, and with my new fresh paint that I'm thinning down, unlike my first few layers of brown many years ago, although I'm doing it over most of the surface, so it's almost like I'm painting in the mid-tone and then leaving the shaded areas in the poorly painted, dark and gritty condition that they started off as. Now what this does is it gives me the opportunity to clean up and repair the paint job, which currently looks pretty bad still, without completely obliterating it and just painting over the top. And this brings me to talk about my little parody at the beginning of this video of eBay Miniature Rescues, who is a very well-known YouTuber in the mini painting scene. And it goes back to some of his earliest videos. Because when he first started, or at least some of his earlier videos, he would take a model that had been painted by someone else, sold on eBay, and then touch up the paint, finish it off, add the highlights and clean up the gaps, rather than completely stripping the model and painting it from scratch, which is what he usually does in his more recent videos. And while it is extremely difficult to paint over paint, I found it, from a technical point of view, very, very interesting, and it's something I've been meaning to try, and so I'm going to try it here. Well, it is a metal model, it'd be really easy for me to strip this down, but I want to at least try painting over paint to see how it comes out. One thing that I used to have a great deal of trouble with when painting is painting teeth. Now, back in ye olden times, before I knew anything about how to paint properly, things like thinning paints and stuff like this that no one had told me about, I had a great deal of difficulty in painting these teeth. And I would end up with essentially just a white splotch over the face, and that's about it. Now, since that, my techniques and my ability have improved a lot, and I can paint teeth from scratch and make them look pretty good. However, in the case of this orc, it's already been painted. The gaps between the teeth have already been painted white, almost obliterated with white. But getting in between the teeth and separating them out is a job that pretty much only one tool can do, and that is a wash. So with a little bit of a blend of brown and white to give the teeth some decent texture, and a black wash to separate them and actually have distinct teeth, I think that has recovered relatively well. Moving on to other parts of the model, let's look at the metallics. Now, on one side you could say that I used to be pretty good at metallics, on the other side that you could say that I haven't improved my ability to do metallics since then. I generally do a lot less dry brushing of metallics because I find that dry brushing is a skill that I've never really been very good at. However, smooth coats and some edge highlighting makes it look pretty...
Edge highlighting? Seriously, you think edge highlighting is a good... Like, what are you talking about, edge highlighting?
Are you talking to yourself again?
No.
Well, with that out of the way, I would like to point out that this video is not meant to be an insult to eBay Miniature Rescues. I wouldn't go to this much effort to do a parody if it was. When I say that I find his older stuff more interesting, those videos where he painted over an old model that didn't look very good, rather than his new videos where he pretty much universally strips the paint off and paints it from scratch. I'm fully well aware of how YouTube works and how making videos works, and if you're going to throw out a video every week, you kind of have to get on and do stuff. And as I'm learning while I paint this model, putting more layers of paint over a bad paint job, particularly when it's thick layers of paint that's been done previously, and while it's definitely something I wanted to try out here, it's certainly not something that I could do with any regularity, and any paint job done in this style is going to suffer because of it, including this model that I'm painting now. If I had stripped it and painted it from scratch, it would certainly look better than it will look at the end of this video. And that's probably just something that I wanted to explain to stop the YouTube comments, people having a go at me, of course. And while I've been saying that, have I been painting the hat purple? Clearly this pirate hat has just disappeared because purple is, as we all know, the unofficial colour of stealth. Because you never see a purple orc, therefore purple orcs must be invisible. Now this is partly because of how I'm going to be using this model eventually once I get some other models painted up to match. Essentially what I'll be doing is rolling all of my oldest orc models together into one mob, and given that most of them are commandos, then they may as well all be commandos. Now this particular model is more of a pirate, but I've got no other pirate orcs anywhere. So yeah, not that an orc would care about the distinction between such things, of course. But also on the topic of colours, one thing that I said at the very beginning is that this whole model is too dark. The browns is too dark, there's far too much unpainted black, and so what I wanted to do overall is to bring the brightness values of the model as a whole up. And what better way to make some bright spots than with yellow? Now I can hear yet more YouTube comments saying, hang on, that's not yellow, that's pink. Well, yellow doesn't go particularly well on a black base coat. However, painting a layer of pink and then painting a layer of yellow, that comes out really strong and bright. Which is of course the goal. Although this actually turned out to be a little too bright. The yellow looked more garish and gaudy than bringing the values of the whole model up. So what I did later on, and unfortunately I can't show you this because I lost the recording, but I glazed over the yellow with the tan that I've been using as a highlight for the leather. And what that did was to keep the high value of the yellow, but bringing it down enough that it wasn't clashing quite so strongly with the rest of the model. But with the largest unpainted sections now painted, really all there is left to do is to touch up and fix all of the highlights and messy areas around the model. Particularly difficult was this gun stock. Because I wanted to paint it as a wooden plank, because that's how it's sculpted, it ended up being a very similar colour to the leather coat. Now I do have enough browns in my collection that I could make a distinction, but I didn't quite manage it here. Another thing that I didn't quite manage was the physical texture that has been created by my previous efforts at painting this many years ago. When painting with improperly thinned paints, that ends up being blotchy and patchy, and that can lead to a physical texture being built up in parts of the model, and once that exists on the model it's very hard to cover it up. Now I tried to throw in some highlights on those raised areas to make it look like folds in the clothes or rust spots on the metal, but it was extremely difficult to work with, and that is probably the most difficult part of restoring a paint job, painting over paint as I've been referring to it in this video. And one last thing I'd like to mention about my improvement in skills over the years is that I am far more attentive to the model than I used to be. And to explain that, I want to point out this grenade that's hanging from this orc's shoulder. And the reason why this is relevant and why it proves that I'm more attentive is that I didn't even notice it the first time I painted it, because I was probably rushing through it, very eager and excited to get it done, and not really having the skills that I have now when it comes to painting. But that's a lot of this model covered, and other than the missing footage that I mentioned earlier, this model is pretty much done now.
Done yet? Can I go?
Yeah, you can go. Get gone. Be gone.
So with the painting pushed as far as I could reasonably get it, given the time I have for this video, the last thing to address is the base. Given that this model has a power claw, it does have to be a character model of some type, probably a nob or noble, the orc unit leaders, and for the rest of my orc army I've been moving those to larger bases. And so I've cast a 32mm base that I'm going to put this on. I'm just going to texture it with a little bit of sand because this model's going into an army, it's not a display model just in its own right. And to match the rest of the army, the base gets a pretty flat grey paint job, and then the model gets superglued. No, not superglue. I'm using UV resin, which is so much better than superglue because superglue is rubbish. And there we go. That's done.
And so there he is, completed and far better painted than he was when I started. I have to say that painting over paint proved to be extremely difficult. The kind of blotchy, uneven surface you get from having thick layers of paint still exists here because I haven't removed the paint. However, it was a very interesting exercise, something that I've wanted to do for a while, and certainly worth doing. So, what do you think about this kind of process of painting over paint, kind of restoring a paint job rather than stripping it and starting it again? You're certainly able to get a better result by stripping and starting again, but there's something to be said for a restoration. And of course we will be discussing this on the Back to the Brush podcast, which you can find a link to in the description of this video. But otherwise, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.
Your parody section is terrible.